Okay, we're going to do some quotes now. We're continuing with the Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're going in alphabetical order. This is Robert Emmet, an Irishman. He said, "Let no man write my epitaph until my country takes her place amongst the nations of the earth, and not till then let my epitaph be written." And so I like these old Irish guys. They weren't a bunch of wussies, you know. Part of why there's such a big effort to feminize everybody in the USA is to make them easier to control, more docile, like a female, okay? Why do you think everything is female this and female that? Why do you think divorce is so unfair to the men? They want to take money away from men, give it to women. They think women are easy to control. Just, you know, all they care about is their children. So they want to just weaken men, feminize everything, decrease the number of, you know, bambinos amongst the proles. They don't want them having kids. They want to bring in persons from across the you-know-what down south that'll be easier to control in the long run. In the short run, no. They don't want them easy to control in the short run. In the long run, yes. All right, anyways, good old Irish days, back when the Irish were stronger. All right, anyways, the real problem with Ireland was they just couldn't unify early enough, and then the big, massive English country just overwhelmed them and kept them as slaves and second-class citizens for 1,000 years. And they're still worse. Now Ireland is being you-know-what, sided. Okay, anyways, next set of quotes, 2 quotes on emotions. George Orwell says, "The energy that actually shapes the world springs from emotion." And I would say that, yeah, people are more likely to act based on emotion than on thinking. Most people are not really much for thinking and accumulating information. The real smart people are, but most people they're not. And I'd also tell you, a lot of times what drives things is hatred. And nobody likes to admit that, but that is what drives things, okay? And sadly, right now, the richest people in the world, they hate the proles, and that's why they're doing so many bad things to the proles. That's why there's F- in your water, aluminum in your water, okay? That's why there's, you know, Al, you know what, in your sky. That's why your food is so contaminated with, you know, soy sprayed with GP and your high fructose corn syrup, your BT corn sprayed with atrazine. You think that's an accident? Everything is sort of feminizing and decreasing IQ. You think that's an accident? No. They want the proles to be docile livestock, farm animals, easier to control. All right, another quote. This one by Baruch Spinoza. "An emotion can only be controlled by a stronger emotion." Okay? Now we got a couple quotes from Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus, the great Renaissance scholar, the Catholic counterpart to Luther. And obviously Luther was a much stronger preacher. But what Luther had done is Luther basically sold out to secularism and went over to the side of the German princes. And for the German princes, it was essentially, to a large extent, nationalistic. They didn't want the money from their country going over to Italy, to Rome, to the Pope, okay? And so Luther needed those princes to protect him, you know, from Charles V, the Emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, and also from the Pope. But at the same time, you know, that led Luther to let a lot of bad stuff slide. You know, in the peasant uprising in Germany, the peasants were slaughtered, many, many thousand of them. Luther turned his back on them. Okay, and you see everywhere it goes, Protestantism, it tends to be taken over by the secular ruler and it becomes a joke, like in England, for example. You know, you need noble masculinity to make anything last. You need noble masculinity. That's why the Catholic Church is down in the dumpster, because you don't allow married priests. You know, I like Pope Julius II. Look, he made the new St. Peter's. He hired Michelangelo. He hired Raphael and other great artists. I mean, what more could a pope do than that? Yeah, so what if he had mistresses and he had kids and he had syphilis? He did a lot of great things for the world, okay? I mean, what a contribution that is to the world, to get Michelangelo and Raphael to make the greatest works of art ever made, like the one right behind me. Okay, anyways, let's talk a little bit about Erasmus. Erasmus was a great scholar in his day. He was one of the few men who could speak Greek and Latin, so he could read both the languages. Latin was still pretty strong because you remember the papacy was in Rome, and so there was a lot of Latin learning. There wasn't a whole lot of Greek learning, and you know, remember the New Testament was in Greek, and Erasmus felt that Jerome had not translated it correctly. Okay, so Michael Sugrue, the great philosophy teacher, he describes Erasmus' jokes as like Horatian satire, more playful, kind of like Rodney Dangerfield type comedy, rather than, you know, Luther is more aggressive, more like Jonathan Swift, Juvenalian type satire, Sam Kinison type comedy, very mocking and insulting. And Luther, you know, he was a genius and he was real funny. Luther was also pretty crazy. Latin learning had persisted relatively well from the Roman Empire. In the 1400s, to know Latin in Christendom was routine for educated men. Greek fluency was rare until the fall of Constantinople. Therefore, the influence in Rome was very high for all the Roman writers: Tacitus, Virgil, Livy, Caesar, Cicero, Ovid, Lucretius, Sallust, and all that stuff. Plutarch's Lives, okay? Erasmus had learned Greek and then made his own translation of the Bible into early Greek version into Latin, okay? I know Plutarch's Lives, a lot of that's Greek, but okay, let's not get into that. Erasmus felt that Jerome had made some mistakes. Luther studied the Greek and then studied the Latin Bible translation by Erasmus. And the big conclusion of Luther after he decided to study St. Paul was that salvation comes from faith alone and not from works. Whereas in the Catholic Church, it's you need both, good works and faith. All right. The dean at Wittenberg assigned Luther to study St. Paul. Okay. And that was sort of where Luther came up with his sola fide, only faith. Sola biblia, only the Bible. Okay, sola gratia, only the grace of God. That's what matters for salvation. And I also think the Protestant church emphasizes too much of this, be good or you're going to burn in hell. Okay, we're tired of hearing that, all right? We want to also live, all right? And the Catholic Church is a million times better at that. All the beautiful art, the community that surrounds it, okay? The beauty of the Catholic Church. There's really kind of like no comparison. Protestantism tends to lead to despair, and then it breaks apart. Okay, the Catholic Church has been around a long time, despite the fact that the papacy has often been pretty bad. Like the current pope is terrible. He's another antichrist. He's garbage. Oh man, the new pope is terrible. They should get rid of him now before he's just gonna make more trouble and be another big jerk. The last pope was terrible. These are the worst popes, and it's because also you're not allowing noble married men in there. So, and then you're also letting yourself be controlled by 503, the 503 exemption rules. Okay, the fall of Constantinople was in 1453, and then a lot of Greek scholars fled over to Italy, and then they had a big increase in interest in learning about the ancient Greeks, about Plato especially. They had already learned a lot about Aristotle from Thomas Aquinas. Okay, here's some quotes by Erasmus. The main hope of a country is the proper education of its youth. That's why it's a big deal that kids go to public schools in the United States. They don't learn anything in grade school and high school. They're a disgrace. I know a lot of the teachers are very nice and they mean well and they want to help the kids, but they don't know anything. The lesson plan is worthless. Almost no one remembers anything from those schools. They should be learning the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and the Bible, and the Renaissance. That is valuable information that sticks with you the rest of your life, and it shows you what greatness is. It makes you aspire to greatness and truth. That is highly valuable. All this mathematics is a joke. It's a waste of time because you can't remember mathematics and you don't use it. Okay, I'm a high-tech, triple-boarded doctor, okay? I don't use any math I didn't know by third grade, versus I remember all the stuff that I learned about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Bible. I use it every day, and every time I read it and make jokes and stuff, it's everywhere. Okay, Erasmus continues. Your library is your paradise. The type of man who is devoted to the study of wisdom is always unlucky in everything, and particularly when it comes to procreating children. Yeah, women don't like male scholars. They're like, if you're that smart, why don't you make some money and give it to me? Okay, Erasmus says, eagles don't chase flies. By labeling the new learning as heresy, they make orthodoxy synonymous with ignorance. And that's also true. Yeah, and I can also tell you, I've read thousands of pages of Bible commentary. No one's ever going to agree on that stuff. They're going to contradict each other all over the place. And the more you get into Old Testament and read all the different commentaries, the different theories, people are going to get into fistfights. I know it. I've studied that stuff. Okay, I've studied that stuff, and I know a lot about it. And I can tell you, nothing good will come from it. It'll just be endless fistfights and arguments. The message of Christ is the same with everybody. That's what you should go with. That makes everybody happy, everybody welcome, everybody treated kindly. If you start getting into, arguing about the details and making a fuss over whether the communion should be required or not, confession should be required, is the communion, way for the true body of Christ or simply a metaphor, who cares, okay? And what I'm saying is you can't resolve those dogmas, okay? They're man-made from different premises, and they really don't matter. The message of Christ matters. Be nice to everybody. That what you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. Okay? That matters. Man is created in the image of God. That matters. And the reason I talk about this so often is that if you don't go back to that, you will never have peace on earth. You'll always have the person in power fighting to take control and impose slavery. Okay, and that's where we're at right now. So hopefully things are going to get better. Okay, many times what cannot be refuted by arguments can be parried by laughter. The desire to write grows with writing. They're smart old guys, they got nothing to do. They all want to write and share what they've learned. And I think it's their obligation to do it because the younger generation really doesn't know. Civilization's not genetically inherited. They have to learn it. They have to study it. They have to be shown the good stuff, why it's worth learning and studying. Because in the end, they're going to have to teach themselves. You can only teach so much. A person has to desire to learn. And so you should teach them about the best stuff in it, and then they'll want to learn it, and it'll stay alive, okay? So you'll have a culture based on, a moral foundation, like a Christian ethics that makes everybody be nice to each other instead of all this modern nonsense. Okay, in his book, Praise of Folly, Erasmus says that the human race depends on folly because no one would get married without folly. No one would venture to have children without folly. And the book poked fun at a lot of people, including the medical doctors of their time and the theologians. Erasmus was accused of heresy and was going to be burnt at the stake as a heretic. And he had to flee to Switzerland. Luther read the New Translation by Erasmus, and at the time he had liked Erasmus as being a great scholar. But later on, Luther was pissed off that Erasmus would not join him in, Protestantism, Lutheranism. Erasmus wanted to keep the church together. And Luther initially did too, but then later on, he's the main guy who broke it apart. And basically, it's been rightly said by Nietzsche and by Will Durant that Martin Luther killed the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, and what a magnificent thing it was while it lasted. Okay, here's a Bertrand Russell quote. Erasmus timidly defended the Roman Catholic Church while Luther savagely attacked it. And that's kind of the sad truth, is that quite often evil is so much better organized and motivated and aggressive, and the good, honest people are so often sort of weak and wimpy and passive, and they get their butt kicked. And that happened in the past, it's happening today. It's sad. Okay, Erasmus continues. It is foolish to talk seriously about frivolous things. Now, like I was saying, to argue about Old Testament dogma and a lot of other religious dogma between all the different sects. Nobody's ever going to agree on that stuff. You can all agree on the message of Christ. Be nice to everybody. Be kind to the weak, the poor, which is most people. Okay, Erasmus, it is wise to make frivolities serve serious ends. Man's mind is so formed that it is far more susceptible to falsehood than to truth. Yeah, that's kind of sad. I've noticed that. It's like most people, they still cling to all the stupid stuff. Paleo, keto, carnivore, where are you going to get your protein, all this nonsense. And, like I said, too, I went to the grocery store and I saw 99% of the toothpaste still had fluoride in it. And I'm like, that's such old news that's a brain toxin and a toxin in 100 other ways. And if people don't even know that by now, what do they know? Next to nothing. They have health class in high school, but they don't learn anything. It's a joke. They learn how to put a condom on a banana, okay? Well, they don't really teach them anything useful. Erasmus, the chiefest point of happiness is that a man is willing to be what he is. And I think there's some truth in that. And Watson had said something similar. An animal is happy when it does what it's meant to do. A horse is happy when it runs, okay? A scholar is happy when he's studying and teaching and writing books, okay? A coach is happy when he's training his team. A teacher's happy when, she's communicating effectively with the students. Everybody knows for themselves what sort of makes them feel like their time is being used for something good and the best possible option. Erasmus, when I get a little money, I buy books. And if there's any left over, then I will buy food and clothes. A true scholar. Okay, then his next quote. Pray for us, Saint Socrates. Okay, Socrates was the saint of philosophy. Later on, Newton became the saint of science. Erasmus, to interweave aphorisms skillfully is to make language sparkle with gems from antiquity. Okay, so that's quotes for today. Hope those were interesting or useful.